I'll introduce the second speaker, who is Eamon O'Shea, also co-author of the report. Eamon is a professor in the School of Business and Economics. Now, he's an economist, so I hope people won't go to sleep when you hear that he's an economist. He's probably one of the few economists that I know that actually can speak intelligently about the whole area of health economics, particularly in aging and Alzheimer's disease. He's got a long track record in this area, and some of the reports that he's been involved in have really been very, very important. I think back to many years ago, your report on the Action Plan on Dementia in 1999, a very, very important report. And this is obviously another key report. He's going to talk about the cost of care of dementia.
And so, good morning, and I recognise some faces from 13 years ago and on the Action Plan on Dementia. And this is, I guess, the next stage, an important stage of the development of a plan. I think you've got a lot of information from Suzanne about what's in the plan in terms of the detail. I mean, one of the things, I guess, before I begin, that's what you mentioned at the end, is the critical stage is the next one, which is the sort of consultation with all the stakeholders, and then the development of a priority for dementia. I think one of the things that's interesting about that prioritisation is that we're all aware that there's severe public expenditure constraints. So I think we'll have to be innovative in regard to how we prioritise dementia in the future. What I want to do is to just give you some data. I'm afraid it could be pretty boring, but I'll try to make it less boring, just some tables. And the interesting thing about the data is, and the tables is, they reinforce what Suzanne was saying about the nature of care and about the sort of fragmentation of care and the orientation of care at the moment. And one table can tell 1,000 stories. I think one of the first things that I think we're all aware of, and we'll be increasingly aware of, and I think it's one of the things that worries policymakers and those who allocate budgets, is that dementia is a costly condition. Now, there's no way of running away from that statistic, but it's a costly condition. It's different than other conditions, because one of the things about dementia is that carers bear a lot of the cost. The distribution of costs are slightly different, and I think we saw that when Suzanne was speaking. And I think when we think about economics and we think about costs, I think we should try and disentangle what these words mean. And I think one of the difficulties of dealing with raw numbers is that behind those raw numbers are real life stories about what the costs of care mean. It's one thing to throw a number, as I'll show on the board. It's another thing to sort of disentangle that in terms of what that means in terms of actual hard minutes, seconds, minutes, hours, and days, one after another, in looking after somebody with dementia. I think this is the critical thing to remember when we see this. We know what the numbers are, or at least we have some idea of the numbers, around 40,000 people with dementia. We know that in 20 years' time, that's going to go up by another 40,000, 50,000. We know that by 2031, there'll be 141,000 people with dementia. In one sense, these are numbers, so what does that mean? Well, it means that if we're serious about meeting need, if we're serious about addressing some of these issues of care, we're going to have to do something different in the next 20, 30 years in order to prepare for those numbers. The other thing is to think about, and I guess my orientation is on economics and the social aspect, the societal aspect of dementia. And one of the things I think that's really important in the next stage is to ensure that we have the right balance between the medicalization of dementia, the economics of dementia, and the social aspects of dementia. Because to me, dementia is a social, it has to be social. If we're talking about genuine community care, it has to be in the context of how we think about dementia, how we think about the aging process, in the context of what we all want to happen, which is living at home if we can, but living at home within communities where people have rights, where people are citizens, where people engage. And I think if we think about dementia in that way, I think we can really do something radically different over the next 10, 20 years here in terms of care. So the perspective I think we need to talk about is a societal perspective. And I think if we do that, I think we'll deal with the medical aspects and deal with the economic aspects. The thing I'm going to talk about this morning is simply a cost of illness study, which in one sense is really boring, to be frank. In a sense, you're just totting up the numbers, but it's totting up the numbers in a sense it tells us something about how the balance of care, and I think that's the most important result I want you to take away today about from the data we generated. The balance of care at the moment is very much in one direction, as we'll see later on, very much where it's borne by family cares. You don't need me, if some of you are working in the system or are already family carers, to tell you that family cares bear a significant amount of the burden. Residential care bears a second, and one of the key elements is that community care really needs to be developed further in order to take a greater share of that burden. I mean formal community care, I mean voluntary community care, I mean quasi-market community care, I mean any type of community care we can get out there, given the constraints, public expenditure constraints we're under. And because we can't walk away from that. We can't walk away from that fact. I can't stand up and say here, we should be prioritising dementia care and we should be allocating millions and millions. It simply doesn't work like that anymore. The one thing that we have to say is that this is not an economic evaluation. We didn't say that one form of care was better on another. We didn't do new analysis that says we should be doing more reminiscence care in long stay care, even though that might be a good idea, or that we should be doing more daycare, residential care. This is not an economic evaluation. To do that, you need different sets of data. So the methodology of this is pretty straightforward. We try to identify all forms of resource use. Now, you might think the life for economists is an easy life. All we simply do is just get some data, churn it around, and the results come out at the end. But one of the problems here is that the data is pretty poor. The data, official data is pretty poor. The unofficial data is pretty poor. So, and this will change, as we know, because of the tilde work, and has changed a little bit, and it will change significantly in the future. But right now, we rely on very much small-scale studies to tell us little bits and pieces of information, which we then extrapolate, and that comes with significant health hazards. So before I begin this, I have to say that the quality of the data is relatively poor, but like all good economists, we've made the best we can from the data. But read the report carefully, read the chapter carefully. We do qualify, we do have caveats, and it's important that you're aware of these caveats. And it's important that these estimates, and I'll show at the end, these estimates, we have to do sensitivity analysis, and so they can vary by quite a lot. But in general, the work that we did, in general, matches the work that's been done elsewhere across countries, in general, matches the distribution we find in other countries, and so on. But bear in mind that one of the things I hope comes from this report is that the quality of the data increases significantly, both official and unofficial data. We could really do more. What we could really do with better data. So therefore, we have to rely on top-down and bottom-up data. We're scrounging around for data wherever we can get it here, and the time frame is the annual cost. So we looked at formal health care, we looked at primary care, secondary care, acute care, residential care, informal care, long stay care, and we just did some premature mortality data. This is different from other studies. If you're looking at the cost of illness of heart disease or cancer, the premature mortality would be much higher. But we thought we'd include it just to make people aware, that people do die from dementia, and people sometimes forget that people do die from dementia. Okay, so what do we know? We know, just to refresh on this slide, 41,000 people with dementia. So that's the data we had to work with. It's 41,000 people with dementia, and really what we tried to do then was to see, well, what types of resource use do these people take up? Yeah. So in terms of one of the things that the other thing was to try to get an estimate of the number of people in residential care. I think we could really do much more here in making sure we really have the true figure here. This is an estimated figure, again, drawn from our knowledge of bits and pieces of work done in community, bits and pieces of work done in residential. I think it's what's quite clear from talking to people, and I've just been through a reminiscence study in long stay care, and the people in long stay care will tell you this. The figure we have at the moment is a gross underestimation, the official figure. Our estimates suggest that about 63% of people in long stay care have dementia. I give those two figures simply to orientate us. 41,000 people in the altogether, roughly 14,000 people in long stay care. So one of the things we had to generate is unit costs, and can I make a plea that somebody set up a unit cost center and generate unit costs for every little bits and piece of data. Anybody who has any information on unit costs anywhere in the country, put them in, give them to me, send them to me in the post, by email, anywhere, because we don't have unit cost data, or good unit cost data, or at least the people who are hoarding them won't tell us about unit costs. So again, this is only a selection of resources, and we had to make heroic assumptions, heroic extrapolation to tell us something about unit costs. Here's just some of the type of things how we allocate unit costs. Yeah, thanks. So measuring informal care was going to be a big issue, and here's where people misinterpret economists, because economists are not accountants. Very important to tell you that economists deal with opportunity costs, not financial costs. So we worry about what do people give up in order to care. We know from other work we're doing on data Brian Lawler generated that care population, about 1 in 3 care population are at work. We know that the average hours these people work are 29 hours, so we assume then that if you're a carer and at work, we're assuming that you could be working more. If you're not at work, on the third point there, and you're not in employment, most people who are not in employment are not attached to the labour force. That's a little bit of assumption in itself and can be challenged. But we assume then that these people will give up only leisure time. Yeah? This is contentious. People get really hot up about this, but economists deal with opportunity cost methodology. Yeah, the alternative is to say, what would it cost if nobody was, if informed carers weren't caring? That's replacement cost valuation. So you have on the one hand opportunity cost, on the other hand replacement cost. People are giving me signals of 1 minute, so I better move on. But that's a really interesting discussion. That's a really interesting discussion in itself about how you measure. Read the report. 807 million, so just over 750 million associated with family carers. The bottom line, right-hand corner. So then we estimated the same way for primary care. You can see, we did the standard GP visits. We had units, and then we applied the costs to these unit costs, to this resource use. So on the left-hand side, you have resource. Here you have the number of visits, or so on, and on the right-hand side, you have the answer. Then we did the same for outpatient medications, inpatient admissions and psychiatric admissions. Residential care the same way. Residential care is the other big cost, 731, 750 million, not surprising. Then when you add them all together, and you come up with the figure, a table which shows the distribution is informal carers bearing most of the cost. Residential care, significant cost. Primary formal health and social care down at 9%. That's not surprising given what Suzanne said earlier. That's not surprising knowing how much more work we have to do in terms of developing community care. And bear in mind, in a system where we say we want people to live at home. We haven't been good at that. Just one more slide after this. So sensitivity analysis, then you have to do sensitivity analysis. So for example, if we accepted the official figure of only 5,000 people with dementia in long stay care, the impact on cost would be a fall of 160 million. Yeah, so it matters that we have the right numbers of people in dementia care to track the costs. If we included dementia as a secondary diagnosis in acute care, costs go up by 100 million. We only used those with a primary diagnosis for our baseline analysis. If we valued carers in terms of the replacement cost rather than the opportunity cost, our costs go up by over $1 billion. Yeah. If we increase care hours from the 8 hours per day that we allocated to 11 hours per day, costs go up by $250 million. We did this for about 10 variables, yeah, up and down, yeah, so you can see where these go. So what are the conclusions? Well, not surprisingly, our conclusions are the annual cost of dementia is expensive. Of course, it's always expensive relative to what? It's expensive relative to the type of care that you either you like to give more. Is it too much? Is it too little? All we're saying it's 1.7 billion. There's no value judgment here. Economists don't deal with value judgments. The average cost of care is about 40,000 per person. Yeah, with dementia. That's roughly in line with international studies that have been done, from other countries if you allocate purchasing power parity. Informal care is based more the cost. Replacement cost valuation, the cost goes up. Dementia is associated with a high burden relative to other diseases. Suzanne already covered that. And finally, the limitations of the data. This comes with again, going back to where I began, you really got to be careful with this when you're making pronouncements on this. It's really indicative. It's really for us to start, to have a starting point. There's difficulty with valuation, with data, how we value informal care, unit costs. All of those limitations are in the data, and you have to accept those when you're dealing with this data. So finally then, I think it's important in terms of a baseline, in terms of knowing the economic costs. It mirrors the discussion that Suzanne had in terms of what we know. It mirrors my understanding, having worked in the field for 25 years, in terms of what are the deficiencies out there. I think the challenge for us now is to find creative ways, and mutually supportive ways, public, communities and families, in order to move us forward in the context of a new plan for dementia. That's the crucial thing over the next 5 years, so that when we come back in 5 years' time, that there will have been significant change, and there won't be somebody writing another action plan in 13 years' time, and it won't be me. So thank you very much.
Thanks.